My name is Patrick McGinnis, and I'm the guy who invented the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out. Today, FOMO is an epidemic, and it's changing us so much that it sort of feels like we're evolving into a new species. But FOMO doesn't have to take over your life. You can find the power to choose what you actually want and the courage to miss out on the rest. I'll show you how right here on FOMO Sapiens. Welcome to FOMO Sapiens, the show about finding the power to choose what you actually want in business and life and the courage to miss out on everything else. I'm your host, Patrick McGinnis, the guy who invented the term FOMO, and I'm coming at you live from AW360 Studios in New York City. So I'm going to confess something to you. Probably the thing that's given me the most FOMO over the last year or so has been Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and I am not alone. If you Google Bitcoin and FOMO together, you get nearly 1 million hits and over 9,000 news stories. But all the FOMO that I had is I watched the price go up last year from basically, a couple $100 to almost $20,000 for Bitcoin. Some of that enthusiasm has changed, and Bitcoin is now about 80% off of its high. Bitcoin Cash, whatever that is down about 98%. Ethereum and Litecoin, which are other cryptos, are down about 95%. And so I have this super complicated relationship with crypto. I'm basically slightly obsessed with it, and I decided that I needed therapy, and so I brought on the perfect guest to help me here today, and that is Jill Carlson. Jill Carlson works with entities ranging from the IMF to Zcash to bring cryptocurrency products to the market. Previously, she ran strategy at a blockchain startup called Chain, where she managed initiatives with the NASDAQ and with State Street. She has also conducted academic research on cryptocurrency at the University of Oxford, where she focused on the economic and political implications of Bitcoin. And of course, Jill hasn't always been in Bitcoin. She started out as a credit trader at Goldman Sachs. Now, fun fact for you regular listeners, she is also the sister of former FOMO Sapiens guest Jack Carlson, the founder of Rowing Blazers. So I want to welcome you here, Jill Carlson. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Patrick. Great to be here. Are we the first siblings you've had on the show then?
You are, you're the first. And frankly, both of you, what I really want to know is how many Rowing Blazers do you own?
I own a few. I think I own 3 and then a sweatshirt. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's a pretty good collection. So yeah, you are the first siblings, and hopefully, you guys will come back again as maybe one day we'll do you together on the same show.
Yeah, let's do it. I would love that.
Okay, so I like to start out with the same question every time, and it's, we all feel a little FOMO sometimes. What is it that converts you into a FOMO sapiens?
Oh man, I think over the last year and a half, the thing that's given me the most FOMO actually has been seeing my friends who are still on Wall Street or working at, kind of conventional big tech companies
Mhm.
living what appears from the outside. I know it's not actually the case. They're all working very hard, but at times appears to be these very sort of cushy, well organized, well executed existences while I've been running around in this kind of entrepreneurial chaos of the crypto market in this wild west. So it's probably a little bit of the opposite of what we usually talk about when we talk about FOMO, which
Yes.
I think is, getting out of the norm. And I've at times, I'll confess, have craved some more of the norm in my life. But
It's something I felt as well. I think back to when I was right out of college and I worked at JP Morgan, and I worked pretty hard, but I remember every day myself and my colleague Marcelo, who's now the CEO of a company called Ipsy, we'd go at 9:30 to this place, this bagel shop in Rockefeller Center, and spend like an hour and a half eating bagels and catching up. And it's sort of like, and I was getting paid during that time. It's like you don't bill by the hour, right? It's like you just, there's a salary that just comes whether you show up or not. And that
exactly.
stability it's very nice.
Yeah, having a steady income that is predictable and denominated in US dollars should not be underestimated, folks.
All right, so you, as you mentioned, you are in this world of crypto. Like, take us back. How did you get involved in the cryptocurrency world?
So, yeah, as you mentioned, I started out my career, I was working as a bond trader at Goldman Sachs, and I was on the desk that was dealing with Latin American debt and derivatives. And so that meant that, every morning I was checking in with folks in Chile and Venezuela and Argentina and, all of these countries where I had colleagues who would give me the market update, whatever it was. And there was one guy in particular who I had a pretty good rapport with who was based in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And at the time, they had major capital controls in place. They had all of these kind of basket case economic policies that meant that it wasn't great to have your wealth in the Argentine peso. And he was the first person who really introduced me to Bitcoin. He called me up one morning all excited, gave me the market update, and then said, "And Jill, guess what? I just got all of my money offshore for the first time in 10 years. Everyone is using this thing called Bitcoin to do it. I just did it. All of the government officials I know are doing it." And that was, again, the first time I'd really heard about Bitcoin in a way that really piqued my interest. I'd heard about it sort of in news articles about the dark web and whatever. But to me, this was the moment where the light bulb kind of went off of like, oh, there's something interesting here. There's, to me, a kind of real use case here potentially. And at that point, I bought some and started trading it around. It became kind of a running joke that I was spending more time trading around Bitcoin than I was trading the actual bonds. That again, I was getting a steady income to actually trade. So that's how I fell down the proverbial rabbit hole. Every time you talk to someone in crypto, they'll use those words. I fell down the rabbit hole.
That's, it's funny that it came from Argentina because I don't know if you knew this, but the first time I heard about Bitcoin was I'm an investor in a tech accelerator in Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
And the founders kept sending me all these companies I guess I'm an investor in some Bitcoin companies is the takeaway, because they'd send me these companies that would be like, we're the first travel agency where you can buy it with Bitcoin. And I thought to myself, like, I mean, I get it in Argentina where the currency didn't work, but I was also kind of like, why does this exist? Like, what is this all about? Like, I thought about buying some Bitcoin when it was at like $200 because of an Argentine friend, Diego Saez Gil, who's the founder of a company that I invested in that was a suitcase company. I mean, so I was in and around the world, but I was skeptical because I lived through some previous bubbles, and we can talk about that later. But I'm glad that you bought some. But if for the person who's the uninitiative and listening to this and saying like, okay, interesting, I've heard about Bitcoin, but like I don't really get it, or I've only just read about it. It's very sort of it's sort of like a very untangible thing for me. What is Bitcoin? For God's sake, explain it to us.
Yeah, it combines, in the words of John Oliver, it combines everything you don't understand about technology with everything you don't understand about money, right? And so there is this mass confusion about what it is, why it might be valuable, whether it's valuable at all. To me, the reason why that story, that anecdote that this Argentine colleague of mine told me really made it click is because it gets to the heart of what Bitcoin can do for you that
Okay.
no other asset in history has been able to. And that's to me what gives it value and what makes it special. And very specifically, what that is it serves as a way of storing wealth and being able to transfer it without having to deal with third party intermediaries. And so, for example, when I talk to my mom about this, it gets very confusing because she's like, "Well, what do you mean it's digital money? I already have my, Bank of America online banking account. Like I already have digital money when I use Apple Pay on my phone. Like why do I need this thing?" And that's all well and good. But the thing is there you're relying on Bank of America and you're relying on Apple Pay and the card that is sitting behind the Apple Pay reader and so on and so forth. You're relying on all of these third parties to manage your funds on your behalf, which for us that's probably all well and good. For me living comfortably in San Francisco, that's great. I should be using Apple Pay in my day-to-day life, not using Bitcoin. But that's because I can rely on Apple Pay and then also, even beyond that, the institutions around us to do what they're going to say that they're doing with my money. But for folks living in a place like Argentina where there's mass inflation, or for folks living in another example I love to use is like Cyprus back in during the Eurozone crisis where there were sort of bank runs happening and seizures of assets, there suddenly you don't want to have all of your money locked up in some
Mm.
online banking system. There suddenly it can become important that you have access to money without relying on these other third parties and these institutions. And that's what Bitcoin can do for you for the first time in a digital way. So that is to me, what makes it really exciting. And that may sound like a very niche use case, but if you think about that on the scale of like, this is a new asset class that can do this for the first time, I think that there is value there.
And then, the blockchain is, explain to us the blockchain, because that, Bitcoin is related to the blockchain, but how and what's it all about?
Yeah. So the blockchain is the underlying technology that makes everything I described work. Now, to understand what it is and why it matters so much, and probably why you've heard this word more times than you ever would have cared to over the last year, it's important to go back in time a bit and just understand sort of the some of the academic history almost behind this, which is that there is a problem that existed in math and in specifically in cryptography for decades, and this was called the double spend problem. And what this problem meant was that it's very, very difficult to have something digitally, to have, say, a digital file, and to prove that it exists only in one place at any one given time. So, just as an example, if I have a PDF document on my laptop that I want to send to you, I'm actually just sending you a copy of that, right? It's not
Yeah.
clear to you that that PDF no longer exists on my
Yes.
laptop.
Yes.
Now, that's totally fine if I'm sending you a PowerPoint presentation or a picture or whatever it is. But when it comes to cash, when it comes to money, it's very important that if I send you $20, I don't also still have that $20, right? Which is why we rely on banks and third-party intermediaries and the Bank of America online portal to tell us that, okay, Jill no longer has that. It's now belonging to Patrick. Now, this problem again had not been solved. People had been working on it, academics had been working on it for decades until in 2008 a paper was published on a mailing list, the kind of niche cryptography oriented mailing list under a pseudonym, detailing a system of how we might be able to solve this problem. And it kind of uniquely combined a whole bunch of different concepts in distributed computing, in mathematics and cryptography that for the first time seemed to make this work, so that I could have a digital file or a Bitcoin, say, and send it to you, and you could then verify that I no longer had it and it only existed in your account. So that's what a blockchain fundamentally does. When people talk about this, that is the problem that it's solving. I don't think that we probably need to get into the ins and outs of why it works and the details
Yes.
of that. When this is one of my big kind of pet peeves actually with the space is people love to kind of wax poetic about exactly how all of this works. And the reality is, for most people, if it works, it should just work. You're not worried about, how your internet works on the back end. It just works for you, right?
Right.
So,
Right. Totally. And so, first of all, I've never heard this explained in such a user-friendly way. So thank you. I feel like I just learned. I mean,
hope so.
I really mean that. Because I've always, I just, a lot of my friends are like the techie types who will be like, well, you have to understand that the ledger has like a unique number of, whatever bytes in it and all
Yeah.
these sorts of things. So what I like about Bitcoin, so we're going to talk about some of the ups and downs of Bitcoin. I just want to start out what I like about Bitcoin. What amazes me about Bitcoin is I would say this is the first time in the history of humankind that there has been an asset that has run up in the way it has, that's created wealth, that was truly democratic. So you think about like, IPOs and like, when the market's booming, like IPOs are given out to preferential customers of the banks. Like it's not like mom and pop or, Sergey over in Eastern Russia or whatever has access to those things. Bitcoin, on the other hand, and as listeners of the show know, I travel quite a bit around the world. Bitcoin is something that is being talked about and being used as a form of at least speculation everywhere. Like whenever I give a talk, no matter where I am, and I just did this in Jordan and in Egypt, but I've done it in Mongolia, I've done it in Argentina, I've done it in Uganda. Most places I go, when I ask if anybody owns Bitcoin, there is at minimum one or two people in the room, if not more. And
That's
so
very
the
cool.
isn't that cool? And so the idea that there is this wealth creation opportunity that you could be anywhere in the world and have access to, that it's not just for the 1%. That to me is like the real virtue of this whole thing, that it's a democratization of access to this thing. Now, on the other hand, it's been crazy. So I look at the prices, I look at the prices of these Bitcoins, and like they went from, almost nothing, less than $100, whatever. Now they popped up to like nearly $20,000. Now they're down in the range of around 3,000 as of the taping of the show. You'll have to Google it when you listen to this today, everybody who's listening, to see where it is. But I have this theory that I want to test with you, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong and what actually happened. But my theory is that Bitcoin, about a year ago, in late 2017, people went home for Thanksgiving. And a lot of people told Uncle Frank and cousin Billy Bob and cousin Joanne about Bitcoin. Because like 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, the price of Bitcoin went up by like 500x. And then it hit peaks in, I believe it's kind of early, late 2017, early 2018. And since that point, it's been sort of on a downward trajectory, and it's quite shocking. I mean, if you look at the figures, you go to Coinbase.com or something. And I remember last year around this time, I was, when this was really at the top, I was in Peru, and I met one of the early investors in Coinbase, which is like one of these big exchanges, and he was on top of the world. And so I think about that, and I think about the amount of friends that I had who, the minute the prices started crashing, they're on Facebook saying like, well, it's not going to go down anymore, and this is a buying opportunity. Buy on the dip at like 12,000, and then there were all these news articles and experts and all these people saying, buy on the dip, buy on the, well, the dip has not ended. So I guess what I want to ask you, number one, is my Thanksgiving, I call it the turkey theory of Bitcoin pricing, the biggest turkey, I guess. Is that reasonable? Number one. And number two, like, what the heck? Like, why did the prices crash? It's a shocker, right? So I'm throwing the floor to you now. I'm done ranting.
Yeah, no, 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 I love it. So you're absolutely right. There was this kind of Thanksgiving rally and even a little bit of a Christmas pop last year too.
The Christmas
But
pop.
to go back to what you said before though about how global this phenomenon is and how you get people from kind of your computer science nerds who discovered it in 2011 to you hear these stories about like soccer moms in Korea who manage the family finances, investing and day trading cryptocurrency. So what I would point out is while I think yes, there is something to the Thanksgiving rally phenomenon, because it's so global and because Thanksgiving is really something only we only celebrate in the States, I don't think that it substantially actually moved the needle. I think that
Mm,
there was just a bigger sort of movement happening last year, and it was kind of a confluence of things. One big, very macro issue is that cryptocurrency, as I mentioned, fundamentally what it does is it intends to eliminate your need to trust third parties and institutions. And I would say, globally over the last few years, we've seen this kind of distrust arise. And you see this in political movements, you see this in the way that people are approaching their work in new ways. And I think that cryptocurrency kind of rode a tailwind there of this phenomenon of people having the lowest levels of trust in institutions that they have for decades. Now, I think much more immediately, what happened was a handful of pretty prominent projects got coverage in Wired and TechCrunch, and then from there, the New York Times and the BBC and all of these kind of mainstream outlets. And, people, for better or for worse, people are fundamentally greedy. We're always looking for ways to make a buck. We're always looking for the next thing. And so I think that, that was a huge driver of the price action. And the third thing that I would say here is that it's it, it was very strange to me as someone who's worked in this space for a few years now to watch this happen, but it almost became like an identifier or kind of a symbol of who you are and what you stand for to own Bitcoin. Like
Mm,
people wanted to own Bitcoin in order to be the type of person who owns Bitcoin last
yeah.
year, which to me again was very strange having entered the space a number of years ago when everyone was kind of like, "You're crazy. What are you doing? Isn't this just kind of the bastion of like drug dealers and sort of underground markets? Like, why would you go and work in this space?" And then suddenly a year ago, it became something that kind of the cool kids were doing, and not just in Silicon Valley. I'm talking universally, which was wild. So that was the run up. As you said, the price of Bitcoin, it touched 20,000. The aggregate market cap of these coins reached over 800 billion, I think it was. And that's not even to mention all of the projects that launched that instead of doing IPOs or instead of raising venture funding, issued coins or ICOs, initial coin offerings. Um, and, they raised last year in 2017, I think it was on the order of like 6 billion. And this past year, it's been in double digits or triple digits, low triple digits of billions, which is just, been a fully insane phenomenon. So
It's
that's the run up.
crazy. It is
Yeah.
crazy. And so, like, I even got a call last year in January from somebody who was reputable, by the way, who was working on creating FOMO coin and wanted to get
Oh
me
my
involved.
gosh.
So,
What'd
I
you
mean,
say?
listen, I said it turned out it was kind of almost a marketing ploy, so
Yeah.
not ploy, a marketing idea, which was fine. I would never, I was asked to put my name on an ICO and I declined to do so. I was going to get some free coins and I declined because I didn't understand it well enough and I thought that it felt a bit scammy. And if you
Yeah.
look at these ICOs, many of them have been. I don't know who the heck would still invest in an ICO at this point. Um, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
I
like,
mean, that's
what's that?
I was just gonna say that's the problem is, as I said, people tend to be fundamentally greedy, and when it feels like there's easy money to be made, not only do people rush in to buy, but scammers also rush in to take advantage of the situation. And that has been a really unfortunate consequence of the hype of last year. And I think that that has in large part contributed to the downturn is that, the rising tide lifted all boats. And so it lifted the very legitimate projects, or in my view, the legitimate projects like Bitcoin,
Hmm.
but it also lifted a lot of these scam coins. And now, as the tide has gone out, of course, the scam coins have been kind of the first to be washed away to sea. But people who've been burned on something like that, or know someone who has been, or heard about it, are, they just put it all in the same bucket and they say, "Oh well, if this was a scam, then Bitcoin is also a scam." When in fact, the technology and the premise and the utility of it might be very, very different. So,
You mentioned earlier about this kind of like cultishness or this culture, people who are saying, I'm a Bitcoin person. I know, I don't know if you haven't read it in the New York Times, there was an article about all these Bitcoin bros who moved to Puerto Rico. I actually know somebody who lives in that house. And they're trying to like
oh,
fix Puerto Rico and there is, and not, some of these people, seem quite reputable. Other people don't. And they seem like they were in the right place at the right time or whatever. But there is this whole culture, and it's a very bro-y culture as well. And you being a woman, a young woman who came out of, Goldman Sachs, like how have you managed the culture of Bitcoin? And I know, we were just talking before the role, we have another friend named Ariana who has a fund in the Bitcoin space or the blockchain space. Like, how does, in the context of all the other things happening in society, like it seems to me like this is an area where probably there's a lot of interesting kind of tensions and things changing, and like how do you maneuver in that space?
Yeah, so there are a lot of characters in the space. People, especially people who've been working in it for a number of years, they've tended to get into it for a handful of reasons. Either they were very into math and computer science and discovered it sort of from an academic curiosity perspective. So you have this kind of nerdy uh, computer science contingent, or people were trying to buy drugs online with it. So then you have, the kind of Burning Man contingent who, again, were trying to buy mushrooms on the Silk Road back in 2011 or whatever it is. Then you have what I would put myself in this category is kind of the Wall Street contingent who, just always has had kind of a fascination about ways of making money, but new asset classes, and got into it from that perspective. But so you get this kind of odd confluence of people. Some of you go to these conferences and some people are dressed up in unicorn costumes because they're in that sort of psychedelic contingent. You have the people that kind of hackers in hoodies, and then you have the Wall Street suits. And you're just walking into these places. You're like, what is going on? What could possibly unite these kind of disparate factions of people? But I'll say from that perspective, actually, it can be certainly not all groups within it, but I think the culture by and large can actually be very welcoming in a way, just because you wind up, just by the nature of it, with all of these different people coming from all different walks of life and perspectives. It is certainly very male dominated, but so is finance. It can be toxic, and there are, some not great people in it. I would even put some of the people who are apparently trying to help Puerto Rico in that category. Like, there are a lot of people who, say that they're doing one thing and in reality they're doing another, and that's usually like a tax dodge. But you get that in most industries. And for my part, my experience is you just find the good people, and there are good people in every industry. So in some industries they're harder to find than others, but once you find the good people, they're great. And again, in crypto, I think almost because people are coming from so many different perspectives, it can be more welcoming. Like, one example is, a few weeks ago I was talking to someone who I would very squarely put in kind of the hacker category. He was a developer for Tor for a long period of time, and I was picking his brain on, some of these computer science concepts. And then last week he messaged me and he was like, "Hey, can you talk to me about financial engineering and derivatives?" And it's that kind of like, everyone is an expert at something, and starting at zero on something else, because it's such a wide range of topics that we cover. So that bit of it is very cool.
That is, it is amazing to me how diverse the group of people is, and I think there's the inclusiveness in some degrees is very impressive. Well, the part that always kind of throws me is like, you really have no idea if somebody's for real or not. Like, it's not like in a
Yeah.
typical industry where it's like, okay, this person's a VP of marketing at XYZ, or they've done these things and that things. A lot of these people come out of nowhere. They don't have the typical sort of like
Exactly.
pedigree or whatever, and so it's like they may hold like, you know. 50,000 Bitcoin that they bought at 2 cents or not. And they could tell you, there's no way of auditing them, I imagine. Maybe they lost their password. And is that still
Yeah,
a problem, by the way?
exactly.
If you lose your passport, are you out of luck forever?
Yeah, so this is one of the problems, right? Is if you're not using, again, like the banking online portal, if you're not relying on a third party intermediary, there's no one to reset your password for you, right? Like, it's on
Hmm.
you. It's the equivalent of having cash stuffed under your mattress and then forgetting where you put your mattress, like in The Hangover or something, right?
Oh my
Like,
God,
yeah, if
that's
you
crazy.
lose it, then you're out of luck. So that definitely is an issue.
So going forward now, you've Bitcoin has been all over the place. There's other currencies too. Like, so you also hold Bitcoin. So like, if I have Aunt Sally who was at Thanksgiving last year, who bought, and now she's here a year later. She's way down. Like, I know the expression is hodl. I think it's hodl.
Yep.
Do you hold on and never sell? Like, what's your advice to Aunt Sally about her Bitcoin? Should she just hold on? Is it just, kind of a lost cause? Like, what is the future for individuals? Like, where are we going?
No, so look, firstly, I'm no longer a financial advisor. Fortunately
Okay,
for
you can
me,
still give
unfortunately
advice.
for you. But look, I think that, everyone's got to make a decision for themselves. I think that this is going somewhere. I think that Bitcoin specifically and, a handful of these other coins that have been around for a while and are actually offering unique features, which by the way, most ICOs that came out last year are not. So those do not fall into this category. But when I look at Bitcoin and Ethereum and Zcash and Monero and some of the other ones that have kind of withstood the test of a few years and are actually finding some fit within their given markets. I think that these are emerging asset classes, and I think that they will continue to go up over the next 5, 10 years. And I say continue to go up because even though they've had 80, 90% drawdowns this year, if you look at it from 2013 or 2011, like they've still gone up quite dramatically.
Yes.
But that said, it's an emerging space, it's emerging technology. Who knows where regulation is going to end up on this? Who knows if, you know, uh, someone finds a way to break these systems over the next few years, the emergence of quantum computing, et cetera. Like, you have to look at it not like you're investing in Apple stock, but like you're investing in a startup. And that's not for everyone, right? You have to take stock of your own financial situation, your own financial goals, and make that decision for yourself. But for me, I'm going to continue hodling.
Do you have a price target for a 12-month price target you want to share with us?
For Bitcoin,
Yeah.
so I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'll say
Okay.
that first. I could see us going down to $2,000 a Bitcoin before we
Mm.
rebound. But I could easily see it going back up over the next 12 months to, $10,000, $15,000. But, again, it's very hard to try and call it. Trying to call the price of Bitcoin over the course of a year is to me a little bit like trying to call the price of a stock over the course of a day.
Yeah.
It's like you got to look at it on a much, much longer time horizon. I'll say this as well. My big fear for crypto and for Bitcoin right now is if we entered a kind of global economic recession, not just a downturn within the crypto markets themselves, but a downturn in global equity markets, et cetera, then suddenly all of the appetite for these very high risk style investments will dry up. And that would be a really major setback. But
Yeah.
that's above my pay grade. So
Well, I think it goes back to, I think about the first bubble that I lived through, which was the tech bubble in 2000. And some of my, we all bought a little stock. And by the way, I had one stock I bought for 39 bucks and then I sold it. It did a reverse split. I sold it for like 39 cents and lost everything. But I'd only
oh, okay.
invested like $3,000. And I had friends who invested their entire bonus and lost everything. And so the thing about these cryptocurrencies and the thing that I forgot because I was such a skeptic is you have to have tolerance for risk. You have to accept that you cannot affect the price. But having a little exposure, you have a limited downside. You can only lose as much as you bought them for. You have
Yeah.
potential, a lot of upside. So can it be a sensible thing to include in the mix of things you invest in? For sure, as long as you recognize you have no ability to affect the outcome and that you should be heavily diversified. And in fact, the internet bubble that happened all those years ago, like now the internet has fulfilled on its promise, but it just took a long time for the market to correct. Once something goes down by 98%, like it doesn't come back right away. It just takes a long time.
Exactly.
So that will be the interesting thing to see. Jill, it's been super interesting talking to you, not just because you're in this really interesting space that I really wanted to learn more about. This was like me selfishly having you come to teach me. So thank you for that. But it's also interesting because you come from a more traditional career. And then you've done something totally different that's much more entrepreneurial. So I like to ask always at the end of our show, like this is the show about finding the power to choose what you actually want and the courage to miss out on the rest. So what is your advice to somebody who maybe wants to do what you've done and get into that world?
I would say just keep following your interest. I did not set out to even work full time in cryptocurrency initially. It was just something that I was doing as a hobby. Actually, when I lost a bunch of money initially on Bitcoin, when I first bought in, it went up dramatically. I felt like a genius, and then it crashed shortly thereafter, and I felt like a total idiot. And I was like, I'd better actually understand this stuff if I'm gonna own it. And that's what led me to really invest the time and energy to go down that rabbit hole. And from there, I built up some level of expertise in the space and started working in it full time. But so I would say just keep following your curiosity. Like I said, I could not have imagined 5 years ago when I first started paying attention to all of this that I would be working in this full time. And it feels like I'm dreaming every day that I wake up. Sometimes it feels like a nightmare when the price is down 90%. But in general, it feels like I'm dreaming every day when I wake up and I'm like, "Wait, I get to work on this full time." That's still just insane to me because just so recently it felt like I was a crazy person for even owning any of it, let alone trying to pursue it as a career. And the other thing I would say is just a lot of this to me has just been a really eye-opening experience of like you can craft the career and the life that you want. It doesn't need to fit into some very specific cookie cutter plan of like having a single job that's paying you an income, or then even maybe having like a side hustle or trying to do a startup that's capitalized by venture capital funds, whatever it is. Like, I just started about a year and a half ago just freelancing, working with some of my friends who were trying to start companies in the space, helping them out. And it's developed into kind of a full time consultancy service, which, that doesn't really fit into anyone's like, mental model of options that you have available to you as a career. But, as long as the cash flow is positive, you can make it work. And so that's been just a really cool eye-opening experience that, you can do really whatever you want with your day and with your life and with your career, and it'll take you just in really unexpected but really awesome directions.
Yeah, it's so true. I think you're right. The mental model, as you mentioned, the idea that you could just sort of build something. Obviously, you need to have the credentials and the relationships, and you need to work at it and the savings to build up the cash flow over time. But you've taken a path that, I think 10 or 15 years ago, number one, your industry didn't exist, as
Yeah.
far as I know. Number two, people didn't necessarily do these things, and there's also a lot of social pressure. Like, what are you doing? And so, I don't, as you mentioned, like talking to, explaining to your mom, like maybe you're, when you go back home for Christmas or for the holidays and you try to explain it to people, grandma doesn't necessarily understand it, and that can be uncomfortable. But if you're willing to stick with it, you can really build something.
That's right.
So Jill, where can people find out more about you and the kind of work you're doing?
On crypto Twitter is a good place. I'm on Twitter at underscore Jill Ruth is my handle. I also have Medium and a website, Jill-Carlson .com. And yeah, by all means, follow me for more crypto musings. And if you're thinking of doing an ICO, firstly, probably don't. But secondly, by all means, shoot me an email and we can talk more about it.
Yeah, there we go. And you can also, I believe you're also in Rowing Blazers, the book, right?
I am, yeah. So my brother, as Patrick mentioned, now runs Rowing Blazers, which is a fashion line, mostly menswear, but some women's as well. But that grew out of a book that he published some number of years ago that I am in. I won't tell you the page number. You have to go find me.
And you can also find the Winklevoss twins, who are also heavy in the crypto world. Like, you're hanging out at your house must just be a combination of a lot of rowing, a lot of blazers and a lot of cryptocurrencies. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, it's very funny because the Winklevoss twins, they started out as good friends with Jack, but then as I was getting more and more into the space, they were super generous with their time. Like I just cold called them out of the blue as like Jack's little sister.
Hmm.
And, they've both probably at this point spent upwards of 10 hours on the phone with me, just like chatting about crypto and back kind of at the beginning, like helping me get my bearings in the space. So
That's
it's
awesome.
yeah, it's kind of funny all of the different layers of overlap that Jack and I have unexpectedly had throughout our meandering careers.
That is cool. Well, shout out to the Winklevi, and thanks a lot, Jill, for coming. It's been super interesting.
Thank you, Patrick.
And now, because I couldn't get enough of the Bitcoin and the crypto this week, I have for our faux moment of the week a new term. So you've heard of FOMO, obviously, but there's a new term that I found as I Googled and researched for this story and this conversation, and it's called FONGO. What is FONGO? FONGO is fear of not getting out. I guess if you want to sell your investments or something, or this is not about getting out of like a cave or a locked room. It's not getting out of Bitcoin. So if you bought in what I like to call the turkey trade up right after Thanksgiving last year, and now you're looking for a way to get out, don't have FONGO, liquidate your position, and you can start the next tax year fresh and new whenever it is that you do sell. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me today. As always, if you're more interested in learning about more on the topic of FOMO or on the topic of part-time entrepreneurship, the book that I wrote is called The 10% Entrepreneur, which can apply to crypto, by the way. You can check me out at patrickmcginnis.com, where you will find more on all of these topics, as well as lots of free resources that you can enjoy. And so I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and take care of yourself until next time, FOMO Sapiens.